Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Anomalies, a show about things that we don't always understand, but we are fascinated with, and we love to have you explore them with us. Today, we have a special guest, Cay Randall-May. Welcome, Cay.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm so glad to be here. I
Well, we're
appreciate
happy to
it.
have you here. I am your co-host today, Gwen Farrell, and my broadcast buddy and co-host here today is David Jinks. How are you doing, David?
I am doing well, Gwen. Looking forward to today's chat as usual.
Good, good. Well, I think it's going to be a really fun and very interesting show. So I think the way we'll start is I'd like to tell you a lot about Kay's distinguished background and career. So I'm going to read a little bit about that then, and we can start with our interviews. Okay. All right. Cay Randall-May has been an internationally recognized intuitive, healer, and psychic for 40 years. Her education includes a BA in Biological Sciences from Arizona State University and an MA and Ph.D. from the University of California at Berkeley. She has taught preschool to college courses and done many guest lectures in general biology, comparative anatomy and physiology, ecology and conservation, metaphysics, comparative philosophy, religion, and more. And she is an author and an accomplished artist. Cay is a founding board member, vice president, and secretary of KNOMI, the National Organization for Medical Intuition, that's dedicated to the advancement of professional medical intuition. She is recognized as a professional intuitive by the ARE, Association of Research and Enlightenment, founded by Edgar Cayce. She conducts intuitive readings with clients throughout the world and serves as a board member for the International Council for Healing, representing healing through prayer and medical intuition. Cay has hosted the Today's Spirit radio show on KFNX Talk Radio in Phoenix, Arizona, and several blog talk radio shows, including The Intuitive Pathway and Above and Beyond. Her books include Inner Visions of Matter and Subtle Energy, Healing and the Creative Response, 4 Key Steps Shared by Healers and Artists, The Intuitive Career, How to Succeed as a Consultant, Reader, or Healer, and the Foundation and Modern Options workbooks and CDs. In addition, she serves as a minister at large for the International Council of Community Churches and is past president of the National Women's Christian Fellowship. Her ministry focuses on prayer and spiritual healing, and she has facilitated a prayer group in Phoenix since 1985, and she regularly leads national conference calls devoted to prayer and healing. Cay Randall-May, welcome to Anomalies.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to join you, Gwen and David. It's a pleasure to be here. I've known you, Gwen, for quite a few years and admire your work, have recommended your books to many people, and it's a pleasure to meet Dave because getting to know him better. Anomaly sounds like a fascinating topic. Where would you like to begin today?
Well, I think I'm going to ask Dave if he'll take the first question, and then we'll just roll from there.
Oh, wow. I didn't expect that because you two have known each other for a while, but maybe that's why it should be me. Asking Kay a few things about her background. Well, the first thing I noticed, Kay, is you're a Pac-12 person, Arizona State, Cal, Berkeley. I went to Washington State. My dad went to Berkeley. What do you have feelings about the recent well, whatever word can you what other word can you use than collapse of the Pac-12, the athletics, the Pac-12 kind of getting spread all over the country? How do you feel about that?
Athletics are really not really my long suit. And when we were at Berkeley, we barely even knew we had any kind of athletic team. I've got to tell you, my interests have always been a little elsewhere. So frankly, I feel that as healthy as athletics are, I think they're a wonderful outlet and a good, strong way for people to join together in a positive way. I myself have not spent a lot of time following that. However,
Yeah.
Arizona State University, when I first went there, had been a teacher's college. And, it became a university a year or two before I arrived. Wonderful, wonderful university, and a great place for a young person such as myself right out of high school to go in and learn so much about the natural world. So as a biologist, I was always interested in all of our natural systems, all of the ecosystems. And Arizona is a perfect place to study ecology because we have all the different ecosystems represented, all the way from the deep, deep deserts all the way to the tallest mountains. And it's a perfect workshop place for natural history. And as an undergraduate, I was privileged to be able to be the curator of the Scorpion Museum and worked for 4 years receiving scorpions from all over the world because Dr. Herbert L. Stonke, for whom I worked, who was the head of the museum and the whole biology, by the way, was inventing and bringing out the antivenom for scorpion sting. And then, of course, I went to the University of California, Berkeley, because it was one of the best entomological programs. Got my master's MS, not MA, but MS in biology, and of course, in my doctorate. It was a wonderful place to go. And you say your dad went to Berkeley. When was he there, David? When was he there? When was it that your dad there at Berkeley?
Well, it would have been mid 60s, I believe.
That's when I was there.
Now mid to late 60s. Yeah, he was.
I was there from 62 to 68.
Okay,
And
would have been in that.
We call it a happening time.
It was, yeah.
It was a happening time, and it was a time when there was a huge amount of interest, of course, in peace, and a lot of protests were going on. And when I got my doctorate and left in 68, the whole place was under martial law, and there were tanks around the perimeter of the city, and the smell of tear gas in the air. It was quite a time. And then, of course, I went and did my postdoc at Case Western Reserve. And my first husband was in Kent University when they had the murders there. So all that time was a time of great, what can I say, activism. I'll put it that way.
Upheaval, maybe even crisis in some ways. And if you look at today, I think many of us would agree that we appear to be in another type of massive upheaval. Maybe it's not riots in the streets so much, but it's more of a scientific upheaval, I think, underlying everything. And of course, concerns about the planet, changes on the planet. There's disagreement about exactly what's happening, but I think everyone can agree that something is happening. There are changes afoot. And I mentioned the Pac-12 being dispersed, dismantled, really. Excuse me. And that institution has been here for over 100 years. It's really extraordinary to see it fall apart in the span of just a few weeks, really. And it wasn't just the athletics, although of course as a guy I'm very interested in that and I track that, but there is an academic war over who gets Cal and Stanford as institutions of higher learning, of course, and with notably intelligent students at the top of the ladder there. So there's a bit of a battle about who gets those schools too, different conferences, and so it's more even than just the athletic issue. And unfortunately, my alma mater is being left behind a little bit, isolated up in the wheat fields in eastern Washington. Oregon State is the same way, but it's really an extraordinary time in terms of, it was such a perfect thing that you brought up the mid 60s, late 60s. And that leads me into my first question to you, and that is, first of all, do you see that kind of revolution happening now? And then the second part of that is how, and we'll get into this more, but how do you reconcile your background in metaphysics and science, or what we just call plain old physics, or mainstream academia, and your religious teachings, and how do you reconcile all those in your mind to keep you moving in one direction?
Well, I agree with Albert Einstein, who I can only paraphrase, when he said that no one can study science without eventually coming to spirituality. And I believe that's very, very true. I have always been interested since I can remember in all of these fields. And what I didn't have in my bio for you, Gwen, is the fact that I came from a family that was psychic. So I was trained from the time I was forever by individuals who had extraordinary abilities, particularly my grandmother, who had a strong influence on me. Had she still been alive, of course, she would have been well over 100 years old, she would have been doing exactly what I'm doing today as a medical intuitive. She was a nurse, and she was an extraordinary psychic. And she came from a family of psychics. And so I was raised with her. We were in the same household always. My mother, my father, my grandmother, my grandfather. I'm the only child and the only grandchild. And so she spent hours and hours with me, training me without ever telling me, hey, stop now, we're training. But we played games. We did all kinds of things that she was taught by her grandmother, who came from Ireland. And I was taught by her that I have what's called a second sight, that it's just a natural, normal thing, that we all have it in our family. You said we're all fae, we're all touched, the Irish word for being touched, and that just means we just have it. So I can remember grandmother and I going different places, and she teaching me this, that, or the other thing that now I recognize as remote viewing. And people would call her up, they would ask her, come over. Winifred, her name was Winifred, they called her Win. Win, can you help me find such and such? It's lost, I don't know where it is. And grandmother, oh, it's here, there. And she never did it for money. She didn't need money. They were affluent. They didn't have any problem with money. But I was raised with that being a natural thing. And from the time I was in first grade, I knew what it was going to be when I grew up. My friends, most of them wanted to be like teachers or nurses or physicians or maybe whatever, run a business. And I was going to be a scientist priestess. And I am a scientist priestess. And this is what, because I could remember past lives all my life. And the rest of my family, nobody really even talked about past lives. I was always sure that there were ETs. I knew it. Nobody else in my family even ever talked about it. It just wasn't that they were against it. It just wasn't part of their reality. And so I went in on a search of comparative religion beginning in grade school and asked them, the adults around me, to take me to all the different churches they could, because none of them agreed on any church. They all were all different churches. The grandparents were Catholic. My father was a Methodist. Mother was a Christian Scientist. And so they said, well, we'll just step back, let her decide. So I had a Rolodex file in those days. This would have been back in the 50s, when I was doing comparative religious studies and having them take me to as many as I could and asking inquiring of these people, what do you believe? Do you believe this, that, the other thing? Seeing whether I could, participate. Ultimately, I settled on the Methodists because my father was a Methodist. I sang in the choir. Everything seemed good. But my grandmother was also a spiritualist. And so I attended the spiritualist churches here in Phoenix and grew up in them, learned to do readings, learned to give messages, and had mediumship training from the time I was little. I've had classes in exorcism and classic classes in mediumship. It's called cabinet training in the old days. And we would sit in circles and actually, call on our guides and teachers. So I was blessed to not be forced in thought into any particular channel too early, and instead was allowed to investigate. My biggest issue was deciding what science I wanted, because I have like 3 cells devoted to the mathematical abilities, and 2 of them are busy doing something else. So I'm not a big math person. Had to be tutored to learn how to add and subtract. So I soon was not going to go into any science that required me to do a huge amount of mathematics. However, I decided on biology, because to me, psychology, unless it was parapsychology, which I could not get into here in Phoenix at that time, I wanted to be a parapsychologist, but there was no parapsychology training at ASU or anywhere else. So I became a biologist and have never regretted it, because then it immediately took me into comparative anatomy, physiology. And of course, I've always been painting all my life, painting since grade school. I love painting and love art and such. So biology has been perfect. As far as physics goes, in later years, starting in the 80s, I aligned with a group of other scientists through ways that I won't go into here because it's too lengthy a story, and have spent thousands of hours in altered state awareness, going to deep, deep, deep meditation, where then I was able to actually define physics in a totally different way. So the way I look at the world is that once we truly understand the nature of matter and energy, we will have no problem at all understanding the connection with what I call higher creative forces. Let me just give it just a thumbnail, then I'll let you get a word in edgewise. All matter is solid, and then it's totally non-physical, and then it's solid again, and then it's totally non-physical, and this happens billions of times per second, just like that. Question is, in one's mind, what has it reformed the same way? If it's totally non-formed and then totally formed, what keeps sodium chloride sodium chloride? What keeps Dave, Dave? Why doesn't it just all, it turned into absolute entropy, absolute chaos? This I call the etheric template, or the mind of God. But I don't see God as a old man with a harp on a cloud. I see it as something undefinable. It's not personified. It's a creator principle. It is something beyond words. It's unknown, unknowable by our minds. But it is that which keeps everything in order, not just you and me, but look up at the sky tonight. All those stars that we can see, and that's just a little tiny bit of what we can see that exists. There is something holding everything in order. And anyone who believes that this is just chaos, to me, doesn't hold the whole picture in their mind. So to me, spirituality and science absolutely are the same. You can't explain one without the other. Now, I wasn't always somebody who attended church, although I did that a lot when I was a little girl. But then through my college years and all, I drifted away from that. But I discovered prayer when, after I got my doctorate, I had a bit of surgery, a necessary surgery, but the surgeon warned me, don't travel. Well, I had to travel. I had to go to my first job, to my postdoc, because I had my own grant. And I was going to be studying at Case Western Reserve. And I didn't want anybody to know that I had to have surgery. I mean, for Pete's sakes. And I didn't want to not travel. So I put I didn't have any children yet or anything, but I had my husband, put all my bugs in the big van, all my scorpions and everything, and all my stuff. And we started from Berkeley to Ohio. I got as far as Phoenix and I hemorrhaged. And I end up then in the hospital, no insurance and bleeding. And the doctors say, oh, well, you're going to have surgery again. Surgery again. So I started to pray. I was all by myself and I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know what to pray for. But so what I did was I prayed to suspend my disbelief. That's how I prayed. Let me get out of the way. You know, I'm convinced I know it all. I got a piece of paper that tells me I know it all. And I'm so smart, but let me just get out of the way and allow something bigger than me to take hold. And it seemed to me like it was hours that I was laying there in the hospital all by myself praying just to get out of the way, when I saw in my mind's eye this big hand that came around the middle part of me and grabbed me by the middle, big, huge hand. And I got hot. The bleeding stopped. I got up out of my bed and I just laughed, just like that. And I told this poor woman who was in the bed, it's bleeding stuff, bleeding stuff. There is something out there. There was something more than me. And then the rest of my journey has been acknowledging, yes, there's something more than just me.
Mhm.
And it's such a beautiful, beautiful mystery. So that's a long story to your question, but it kind of explains why I'm here today with you.
Well, I just have one follow-up, and then Gwen, I'll throw the questioning over to you. You've covered so much there. I have about 10 follow-ups, but I'll stick with one, and that is you mentioned the etheric template of the universe, and that is something that I think is profound and the key to understanding. And you essentially said that what that is perhaps the mind of the creator. It's the mind of God. It's the rules set out. If you want to use a more mundane analogy that's appropriate, especially these days with artificial intelligence popping in all over the place, in the news and everywhere else in science, it's the programmer, the rules set by the programmer. And I think the reason that you and I and Gwen and other people interested in all these kind of paranormal, weird subjects, mysterious subjects, is that they seem like a way to outline some of those rules that are present that were put in play by the creator or God or the universe, universal consciousness, however you want to characterize it. If we can understand the underlying rules, then yes, of course, like you said, the other things kind of just, the puzzle pieces fall into place, and it makes more sense when you're separating things by metaphysics versus physics, and spirituality and religion versus hard science and whatever. Those things come together and the underlying rules are known. Now, I want to ask you, Cay, if we as humans can we learn those rules, first of all, and can we affect those rules? Can we in essence play a part that the creator plays, maybe on some tiny level, What do you think about those two ideas? We can play a part in creating reality, and can we know the underlying rules of reality?
I believe that we need to recognize a couple of basic, in my opinion, after living so many years, basic facts. One of them is that I'm not in control, and you're not in control, and Gwen's not in control.
Mm-hmm.
However, we can have a degree of control over our response to reality. And so there is a philosophy that I greatly espouse called the Tao, T-A-O, the Tao, the way, which has to do with living in harmony with the way things are. And I feel it's exceptionally important to recognize that. But I'd like to go back and define just a couple of other things. When we talk about science and we talk about religion, we're talking about two different things. And spirituality is slightly different from that. Science addresses, all science only addresses the what happened, when it happened, how it happened, where it happened, but never why. Never. Religion addresses why, but never how. And when we recognize that these two approaches to thought do not conflict, they just mesh together, then I think we get in a lot less trouble with our philosophy and our discussions. Because whenever a scientist forgets the why and misinterprets that and says, well, this is what happened, and absolutely we can measure it and everything. Well, that's true, that's true, that's true. But it'll never explain why. And yet people sometimes forget to ask why, or they think there is no why. Religion is saying it's all about the why. And then they sometimes try to fill in the blanks of the how and the what and everything. And that's when they get in trouble, because it's like, okay, no, I'm sorry, but we can't prove that. But the why part, yes, maybe we can hold to that. And spirituality, I think, bridges the gap between. I see spirituality as less dogma being a certain set belief systems that must be accepted without challenge. That's dogma. And we have dogma in science, and don't ever think we don't. And we have dogma in religion. And anybody who swallows dogma whole is apt to choke on it after a while, because it changes, our understanding changes of things. So in science, what is the dogma? It's that there is nothing beyond the 5 physical senses. Absolutely. It's impossible. And there can be no possible influence of my mind on Gwen's mind or on Dave's mind, because I'm here, they're there, and anybody who says elsewhere is crazy. Well, pardon me? I think that's poorly understood science. That's limited science. And so the science I'm talking about is quantum physics. It's very similar to quantum physics. And when we understand that, surely when I'm in my physical part of my existence and Gwen is in hers and Dave is in his, of course we're separate, we're in different places. But when that part of us is in total, complete, undifferentiated energy, there is no logos. That is, there is no position. There is no time. There's no separation. There's no distance. We are one. And then we come back to being separate. And then we go back to being one. Until this concept comes into modern everyday physics, it's going to still be a half, shall we say, half truth. And unfortunately, when people, and I've taught people from preschool to graduate school, and I've had children, of course, mother and grandmother and great grandmother. And if we speak to children as if we have the whole shebang, we understand everything, we do them a disservice every time, because we're always only teaching them part of what really is reality, because we don't know it all. We can say to our children, this seems to be what works for us. This is how we put these laws and rules and things in order. And it's a good working hypothesis. But you, my child, may discover something more and take it a little further. Because science, this is another aspect of science, it's always up for change. True science can always be changed. Dogmatic, false science is set as concrete. And we have a saying in science that science progresses one funeral at a time. And this is because people's minds get set and they get a stake in the game, that this is their principle and this is their belief, and you can't sway them. And that's sad. That's unfortunately because true science is always up for grabs. Now, you were talking about the pack and all of that. I'm here to say, Dave, that I feel we are in the middle of a revolution. It's the biggest revolution we've ever been in since the beginning of time. And we are in a revolution of consciousness in which humans, everyday people, are going to realize we're not alone. We're not the only sentient creatures in the universe. This is hugely impactful. But as a biologist, I'm saying it makes absolute sense. Nothing else makes sense, that we would be the only life form out there. That makes no sense biologically. And as a person who is spiritual, I'm saying it makes no sense either. Because the same God source that made crickets and centipedes and saguaro cacti and everything else here is also working out there and making stuff out there too. It has to be. It has to be. So the dogmas are clashing. The dogma of some dogmatic religious beliefs are clashing with some dogmatic scientific beliefs. And we're all standing here in the middle like, and it's a fascinating time to see these people clash, because guess what, guys? Guess what? I hope I live long enough to see enough of the disclosure for people to say, so that when I'm preaching in front of an audience, which I preach a few times a year in a non-denominational church, where I could actually come up and speak from the pulpit and say, thank goodness there's life everywhere. And because it just makes sense. Nothing else makes sense. That's the revolution. That's the one we're living in. And it is exciting to be alive today.
Yes, it is. Gwen, go ahead and get some
Yes, thank
in.
you. I have a couple specific questions, one about prayer, but I want to get to that. But also, can you explain for our viewers what is intuitive medicine?
Okay, well, medical intuition is the way we call it, and that's a process where a person such as myself uses clairvoyance or remote viewing and goes through a person's body and their biofield, their energy field as well, looking for anything that deviates from what we would expect to be the norm. They may not be necessarily pathology. They might just be some unusual deviation, an extra rib or something that looks different. But I do this all the time. I work with people all over the world, and I've been doing it for many years. I'm certified through the American Board of Scientific Medical Intuition, and started by Norm Shealy and Carolyn Miss, and also now with NOMI, National Organization for Medical Intuition, which is a 501c6. We're a trade board. We're bringing definition to the field that is used widely but we're trying to bring it more to the forefront of the medical profession so that it's not misused or misapplied, but that it is more clearly defined. So it's about looking at the physical field and the physical body in all of its, even down to the DNA, and determining what might be the root cause of illnesses or various issues that a person might have. I have had the great pleasure of working with hundreds and hundreds of people all over the world, and still do it every single day, and will be forever probably. But it's not fortune telling, and in itself is not healing. Healing can be applied in conjunction. In other words, some people might be an acupuncturist, the next person might be an energy healer, somebody else might be a podiatrist or something. But if they use medical intuition, that's just a way of looking to see what's going on, and then a healing modality can be applied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was going to ask you that if the healing modalities were used also, but it makes sense to you that you're just doing. Would you say it's actual diagnosis you're diagnosing, or is that a different term than you would use?
We prefer not to use diagnosis because that is a term that's got legalities involved with it. We're doing an intuitive assessment.
Okay.
And encourage everyone who's ethically bound, and we in NOMI make sure people have ethics training and everything, ethically bound to give one's opinion as a medical intuitive, and encourage the person then to go to a physician. In other words, you can't just call up a medical intuitive and ask if that lump in your breast is cancer. No, I want you to go and get good diagnostic care and follow up with your doctors. It's a very, very gray area at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people who do that. And by that, I mean, they might substitute their intuitive work for a more, shall we say, allopathic or naturopathic means. But I encourage, and NOMI encourages, everyone to go see their doctor as well. We don't diagnose or prescribe, predict. Like Dave, you might call me and say, hey, I want you to tell me about my Aunt Sarah. Because, when she dies, I might come into a little bit of money. Tell me, is Aunt Sarah going to die within the next 5 months? And I've had calls like that. I'm saying, even if I knew that your Aunt Sarah was going to die, I wouldn't tell you. This is beyond the scope of ethics. Mm-hmm. So this is something which, and what we do is, like people like Norm Shealy frequently would call me up and say, Kay, I've got such and such a person in my room here with me. Tell me what's going on. He wouldn't tell me what the name of the person was or anything. And I would do remote viewing about that person and tell him in great detail as to what was going on with that individual. And so, it's a situation where we're using clairvoyance, we're using remote viewing. Mm-hmm. And the way this works is that our senses are not limited to our 5 physical senses. When our physical bodies are in that pure energetic phase, we are one. So that information can come back to my consciousness with training. And it's been training through my entire life, learning to essentially get in touch and in tune with my intuition in that way.
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting. I'd also like to ask you about prayer. You mentioned it before, and I know it's something that is a part of what you do and have done for a long time.
Yeah, very much so.
I would say that probably most people, when they think of prayer, or they think of praying, first of all, they think of that it's a religious activity. And many people might say, and I've heard this much in my lifetime, that people say, well, prayer, it might work, but I don't know how to do it. I mean, my church teaches me how to do it. Okay, my church says you have to say this, you have to say that, you have to be in a certain state of mind, you have to do it 3 times a day or whatever. And I think many people don't understand it, and they're afraid that they're going to screw it up if they don't do it right. And then at the same time, I have many people that I work with who think of prayer as more like meditation or consciousness, reaching out to the consciousness, or even affirmations would be perhaps a similar type of prayer. I think it's a huge topic. Can you please explain that a little bit?
Yes. Years ago, back in 1985, I had my own church, and I was ordained in 1982. And so I opened up my own brick and mortar church, and my husband and I had our church, and I would do a lot of channeling work and all kinds of stuff. But I also did a lot of teaching, a lot of metaphysical teaching. So for about a year, I taught a class on prayer. And every week we would meet, and I would have handouts and all this stuff about all these different types of prayer. And then in that process, we explored all these different approaches to prayer. There are about 8 different approaches to prayer. There's a whole school of thought, the prayer outsiders. And then there's the whole school of thought of the prayer insiders. And so I lead a prayer group and have since 1985 that combines the whole thing. I wrote a book back in 1999 called Pray Together Now, How to Find or Form a Prayer Group. It's not even on your list because it's way out of print. At that point, my husband and I interviewed over 125 prayer groups from all different religions and different denominations, asking them, do they have prayer? Some said no. Do they have prayer groups? Some looked at us like we were crazy. Of those that had prayer groups, how do you participate? Do you have to take classes and all this? And how do you do this? And it was fascinating. And so I have all those listed in that book, How to Pray Together Now, How to Find or Form a Prayer Group. And you'll find that there are some individuals who believe that when they're praying, they are praying to some kind of force outside of themselves, whether it's a religious figure, a saint or Jesus or God or whatever. And it doesn't have to be Christian. It can be of other faiths as well, some god or goddess. And that somehow their prayers for petition, as we say, they're asking for things, will be granted or not. And then there are the group of people who believe that as they pray, they are literally unclogging their subconscious, that their affirmations or their positive thoughts get up to their high self, which is another part of the personality, and that literally the God within will allow these things to manifest. So we do both in the prayer group, essentially. And in my book, I outline the protocol. Lasts about an hour and a half in our prayer sessions, and we do them every other week. Anybody can, there's no charge for it. I don't want 10 million people to call up, so we always keep it fairly small, because when I begin by balancing the chakra system and going through and having a meditation and guiding through, and then we count our blessings, and then we do something that's very, very important that sometimes is left out of every single worship service you're ever going to go to. But Scripture says, if you have anything against anybody, if there's any animosity that you have, leave right now and go settle this and then come back. Well, most people never going to do that because there wouldn't be anybody in their church. Everybody be jumping up. But in the prayer group, what we do is at that point, after we've counted our blessings, we spend time forgiving, silently forgiving those with whom we've ever had difficulty. And then we spend time forgiving ourselves. And that's very important. And then we start in with affirmations, positive present tense statements, which literally then we affirm out loud with the people there on the call. And we affirm first for ourselves, and then we do single word affirmations. And then we affirm for the earth. And in the background there of your picture, David, that's not the moon, that's the earth in the background. And so we imagine the earth in the middle of our prayer circle, and we pray for the earth. Being a biologist, we probably have one of the few prayer groups that prays for the earthworms and the krill and the butterflies and the whales. We pray for all of the animals and the positive everything. We pray for them all. And then we move ahead and are grateful for the guides that we have, and for the unseen forces. And we just go, and then we have personal prayer for everybody who's there, who wishes. We ask what they want to pray for, and we pray for them. And, at the end, we do something from Huna. Have you ever heard of Huna?
I don't think so.
You've heard of kahunas, the big kahunas?
Yes.
Part of that expression. Huna means secret. And it's a very ancient Polynesian belief system. It's not a religion, but it's a very ancient belief system that I thoroughly ascribe to, that we have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind, and then a high self that kind of runs the show. But in it, they use water. And so at the end of the prayer call, we have water, just like I have a container of water here. Everybody holds their water, their glass of water or whatever, and we put prayer into it, love into it, changing the molecular structure of the water. And then we literally drink that to take it in as medicine for body, mind, and spirit. And been doing this now many, many years. And there are some people, it's not a source of money for me. I don't charge for it. There's no charge for it. We don't take up a collection or anything. But the whole idea is that it is, it's food for the soul. It's wonderful. But I believe in living life prayerfully. And just as scripture says, to pray without ceasing, as Edgar Casey said, every thought is a prayer. And I believe that. So if we spend a lot of time, fearful and anxious and angry, and we're poisoning ourselves with that. And biologically, this is shown, it changes our chemistry. So I believe in the Tao, the way, trying to get into that mindfulness pattern where we are at peace and not grasping. And it's a miracle. It truly is a miracle just to live in this way.
Yes, I agree. And I think that it's really good therapy. From a point of view of a therapist, when I think, gee, I work with my clients like that. So it's just, and to me, it sort of seems what you're doing is taking it away from everything is out there and it's bringing it in here. And I see the greatest value is what we ourselves receive when we do a practice like that. That's a positive practice for us. So yeah, I'm very interested. I was kind of curious to see how your methods are doing that, but that's very interesting, and it's terrific therapy. I think I want to have
a delight to, I don't interrupt you, but it was a delight to talk to so many people from so many different prayer groups, because to be surprised how many thought theirs was the only one or the oldest one. And we found that the oldest continually meeting prayer group was in the Catholics, of course. But we found some others who never even heard of the other prayer groups. And there were some groups who just laughed at us. No, we don't have prayer groups. Of course not. And it's just amazing. And I had one, I even was calling across the ocean to different places. And I remember talking to one Anglican officiate. I don't know what his level was, but I said, don't you realize that God only answers the Anglican prayers? I realize that. Let me write that down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was he
Wasn't
kidding?
aware of that. Tell me.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
I didn't think Jesus was an Anglican. I really didn't. Now I know.
Okay. Well, before we close today, I would do want to bring your art in. because I
Oh,
know you've
yes.
done a lot of art, and I know you do many different types of art, painting, but material arts and other things. And I'd like to ask you how that art works together with your spirituality, your intuition, and if you can explain that. I have a feeling you don't just go in and put paint on a piece of paper. There is something, there's a creative response there, and so can you explain that?
Oh, I've been painting since I was a child, and I've always loved it just from the beginning. So when I was in sixth grade, I remember painting a self-portrait, but it was not a portrait of me now, but a portrait of me in a past life. And it was in Egypt. And it wasn't the typical thing with the Egyptian top and all this. It was just this person's face. And years later, I found the similar painting style when I was doing my postdoc at Case Western Reserve, because there was the Cleveland Clinic. We were there. I was the Cleveland Clinic, and there was the huge art museum there. And we would walk across the art museum, and there in the Egyptian section, there were these paintings that were done. They were on linen, and they were done in like crayon. They were a wax painting, and there was the painting type that I had done. So as a biologist, I really became interested in scientific and technical illustration. So in high school and in undergraduate school, a lot of my art was devoted to highly technical drawings, anatomy drawings. And I did my master's on the scorpion circulatory system, and so I drew very, very detailed drawings of the heart and the major vessels and all in scorpions. And then when I did my doctorate on muscle and nerve interaction in a wax moth caterpillar, and it's a change through metamorphosis, and I did ultrastructure, worked a lot with electron microscope. But first I did a study of the musculature of the body wall of the caterpillar. So I published a paper on the very, very detailed layer upon layer upon layer of the muscles in the body wall, and choosing one muscle, the proleg retractor muscle, that I ultimately studied for my doctorate, and denervated it with spider web. Did many, many, many hundreds of dissections on caterpillars. We didn't put to sleep, but we anesthetized with cold and carbon dioxide, and they get, kind of, and then go in and take iridectomy scissors because I was in my 20s then, so I had real steady hands, iridectomy scissors, and I've cut the little tiny incision and fish out this one nerve that innervated this one muscle, and ligate it with spider web, black widow spider web. So then follow the changes in it, pat it dry, got the little guy back up and feed him again, and do all of that stuff, and using the electron microscope for years. So my drawings for many years were technical and scientific. And then as I got older and later on in life, I wanted to do more fine art. So I took a lot of art classes. I studied at the Arizona Art School here in Scottsdale, one of the best art schools in the country. I took 4 years of commercial art as a commercial art school in Cleveland, and learned to do airbrush renderings. Now that's obsolete. They do it all on the computer. I worked as a medical illustrator when my children were real tiny. And then I worked at Cleveland Clinic as a medical illustrator. A lot of this stuff they do with computers now, but we did it all by hand then. The hardest part for me, though, is to loosen up. And what I've always wanted to do with my art, just to get looser and looser, I've always wanted to be a surrealist. A surrealist is defined as someone who paints something, but when you look at it, it seems real, but you realize it couldn't be real. Because it's absolutely looking real, but it absolutely couldn't be real. So some of my paintings that I have my whole house is filled with paintings. I'm working on a painting right now. But they are approaching surrealism. Maybe in my next life I'll be a surrealist. I'll see. We'll see if I get there by that time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, very, very interesting. I don't want to keep us too much more today, but I'm going to give David a chance to ask a question, and then I will have my final one. So, Dave, did you have another thing that you wanted to mention or ask?
Boy, let me just give me a moment here to,
In the meantime, while he's doing that, Cay, can
uh-huh.
I ask, do you have a website or an email
Oh,
address
yeah.
that you would like to tell us about so that our viewers can get that down? So,
Absolutely. The best way to reach me is by email with crandallmayphx at AOL.com. It's just my name with PHX for Phoenix at AOL.com. They can call me 602-404-8646 between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Pacific time. And my website is cayrandallmay.com. They can also use praynow.net and they'll get right to it. Or I have a couple of other ones, but if they go to cayrandallmay.com, they'll see me. And there's a picture there, a painting that I did of myself in 1978, where I stood in front of a mirror and painted my portrait, and then the energy field as I saw it, because I began seeing the energy field in 1973 when I was pregnant with my second child. And I began, after a series of dreams, to see the aura in color, in bright daylight or at night, just all around everybody. And nothing was published at that time about it, other than Ledbetter, which didn't look anything at all like what I done. I mean, Rosalind Briere hadn't published, Barbara Brennan hadn't published. So I decided, well, I'm going to document this. And that's that painting that I have up there. That's me in 78. And some of the colors, and they swirl and they twirl and they move. And so I just wanted to document that. So I kind of use it kind of as a logo over these years.
yeah. And so thank you for giving that information so our viewers can contact you or find out more about you. Dave, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I still have many, but I'll kind of boil it down to one the most profound questions. Also, Cay, you got a good eye. You pointed out that that's the Earth. That's Earth behind me. I think
Not the moon. Yeah.
Well, it's the reason I said the moon is that I think it's a lunar the lunar surface. Someone's imposed
Pyramid.
the Great Pyramid onto it, and I think I don't remember which Apollo mission, Apollo 14 or 17, that's showing Earthrise from the surface of the moon.
Earthrise.
Anyway, that was a good eye, but that's kind of related to my last question, and that is that as we learn, hopefully relatively soon, about the existence of what we're calling ET, at least other intelligences, other beings, creatures from elsewhere or from within or wherever they're coming from. I think probably the moon will play a part in that. Obviously, the Earth Earthlings will be becoming aware of that, the existence of others, and then Egypt is awash with mythology and symbolism and all that. What do you think? Well, first, do you have a timeline that you think that this disclosure that we're all waiting for will happen? And then what do you think will be the consequence, immediate and of course long term, of this realization? Because as you said, a lot of people don't, it's not even in their realm of existence that ET could be out there or that they are out there. A lot of people are going to be blindsided. People like you and me and Gwen, who are obsessed with some of this stuff, are going to be like, thank God, finally. But a lot of people are just going to be, hit on the side of the head like, what do you mean? That can't be. What is your short-term prediction and your long-term prediction about this disclosure?
I feel disclosure will be gradual, and it is gradual. It's going to be an acclamation. For instance, as an example, if you have an aquarium at home and you buy some new fish, you don't just dump the new fish in your aquarium. You put them in a plastic bag in a little water and you let it float around for a while so that they can get acclimated to the temperature, and then you dump them in. And this information will be, worked. It has been worked now for quite a few years through the media, beginning with ET Call Home and all of this. So that now, if you talk to most people 20 or below, they don't think a thing of ETs. And they, of course, naturally, they think of ET Call Home. They think of, so it's going to be a gradual acclamation. The Catholic Church has already come out and said it's not a non-Christian belief. It's not anti-Christian to believe in extraterrestrial sentient life at all. They're ahead of the curve. And so we're seeing gradual acceptance. The question is, so what? Because it's not merely extraterrestrials, it's extra dimensionals that we're talking about. And let me just, before we go, because I know we're at the end, I'll just define what these different dimensions are. And I think it might make it more easy to understand the way I see physics. Everything is winking in and out of corporeality. Call that a duty cycle in physics. In other words, there's a rate at which things are becoming physical and non-physical, physical and non-physical. Well, some things are physical when something else is non-physical. And it's like this. It's like this. So the duty cycles of different dimensions, and I see up to about 12 of them, are just slightly out of phase with each other. So we're living in a multi-dimensional world where there's travel routinely by some species between one dimension and another, between our third dimension and the fourth dimension. And there are amazing numbers of existences, parallel worlds that interpenetrate all the time and always have. So it is a lot more complicated physics-wise than we might just think from the old Buck Rogers days. It's going to take time for science to catch up with fact. And as science is taught more and more and more and more about quantum physics down to the earlier grades, and there's this great understanding of the existence of life everywhere, I don't think it'll be such a shock. It's going to be an adjustment, but not a shocking adjustment. I don't think there'll ever be disclosure with a capital D, where the television program, your sports gets interrupted someday. And, fuzzy picture gets clear, and here's the president standing up there and saying, and he's got some people behind him in the UN and something saying, oh, and by the way, we've always had these people we're doing business with, and they're from, no, it's not going to happen. But it doesn't have to happen, because it'll come from the bottom up, and the younger people. Every one of my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, even the great-greats or little kiddos, the grandchildren are in their 20s and early 30s, and to them, no big deal. Of course, there are other
well, and
species.
you know as well as anyone, having been in academia for so long, that Dan and Gwen and I talk about the Brookings Institute report of 1960, which was
That's what
presented to
caused the
Congress.
problem.
Yeah, and what those 200 plus sociologists and other scientists concluded was that it was going to be
A meltdown.
they tried to pin it on the religious sects, right? They tried to say, well, these guys are going to freak out because God says that ET, but they concluded, even themselves, taking a look in the mirror, that we're going to be the ones freaking out most, because we're concerned with the mastery of nature. We're at the top rung, of the cosmic ladder, and understanding the understanding that we're not, discovery of different dimensions, different, maybe millions of years advanced intelligence. we're no longer at the top of the ladder. And they were very honest, brutally honest in that report. They said, hey, it's the scientists who are going to freak out. Can you speak to that just briefly before we end here?
I think true science is always open to change. And once people appreciate the nature of physics, it hinges on understanding physics. So many of these subjects that you are dealing with in your podcast and in your program, that's called Anomalies, are not anomalous, they're normal, they're natural. It's just they're poorly understood. And once things are understood more, then it's just a matter of, okay, now let's deal with it. Wouldn't it be interesting if we find out that in other other civilizations, they also had something similar to Jesus? Wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't it be interesting to find out that they have the Tao or something even more inspiring? So we're going to be learning from others and growing from others. What will probably expand is our tribal system, because we've grown from the tribe of just a few people in the neighborhood to the tribe of the nations, to realizing we're earthlings. That'll be our tribe. But then the earthlings will be on the moon, and they'll be on Mars, and our tribe keeps expanding. That's what we have to have, the kind of elastic bands in our tribal thinking.
Well, let's hope that it's people like Cay May who are presiding over this change, because she's making it sound like it's a smooth transition, and there's going to be a lot of bumps and lumps in this thing. But if we maintain that rationality and open-mindedness, I think you're right, we can get there. It's going to be a heck of a ride, though. I agree on that one. I hope we all live to see that.
Well, I've been a member of MUFON for years and years and years. I've been a field investigator. I'm not at the moment, but I first was a field investigator for APRO in 1970. Wow. And I still carry their little card, APRO field investigator, even there's no APRO anymore. And I feel that everybody, wherever you go, have to just normalize the conversation. Maybe not about medical intuition. A lot of people never understand about that or agree. And I don't go around telling people I'm a professional psychic, unless I really don't mind if the conversation changes. But we can say, yes, it doesn't make sense as a biologist that we're the only sentient creature in the universe. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Cay. It has been so much fun and so interesting today. And I am sure that Dave would, along with myself, would love to invite you to come back again in the future when you have time and talk to us more about what you've learned. And that would be terrific if you have time to do that.
I would love to do that. I would make time, because these subjects are profound, and we could talk about propulsion. We could talk about all kinds of interesting subjects, as well as the things that might be called anomalous.
Anomalous, yes. Well, thank you so much. Our viewers are very interested in the things that we've talked about today. So we would love to have you back. So thank you very much, Dave. Thank you very much, Cay. Thank you very much for all the viewers here today. And we're going to say goodbye. And we will look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Cay. That's great.